You've probably walked past 3 Starbucks locations this week without even noticing. That's not an accident. That's the entire business model hiding in plain sight. Most people assume Starbucks makes its money selling coffee, a $5 latte, a bag of beans, maybe a pastry on the side. Simple enough. But if that were really the business, Starbucks would be a coffee company. And it isn't. Not really. Walk into a Starbucks anywhere in the world, and you'll notice something strange if you pay close enough attention. The layout barely changes. The music sits at the same volume. The lighting is warm but never dim. The chairs are comfortable, but not comfortable enough to nap in. Every single detail has been engineered, and none of it is primarily about the coffee. To understand what Starbucks actually sells, you have to start with where it puts its stores. Starbucks doesn't choose locations the way a small coffee shop owner does, based on rent or a nice corner. It chooses locations the way a hedge fund chooses assets: foot traffic data, commuter flow, proximity to offices, visibility from the street, even the direction cars turn out of a parking lot. There have been internal reports over the years showing Starbucks studying intersections almost like traffic engineers, because a location on the corner someone passes on their way to work is worth more than a location someone has to detour for. This is the first hint of the real business. Starbucks isn't just selling drinks, it's renting attention. Every store is a small permanent advertisement sitting in the highest traffic real estate it can find, reminding you it exists every single day, whether you buy anything or not. To really understand how deliberate this is, it helps to go back to where the company started. In the early 1980s, Starbucks was a handful of stores in Seattle selling whole bean coffee, not drinks. It sold you the raw material and let you make it yourself at home. The transformation into what we know today happened when the company began selling the experience of coffee, not just the coffee itself. Espresso bars, seating, ambiance, the so-called third place between home and work. That single shift, from ingredient seller to experience seller, is the seed of everything that followed. It meant location, atmosphere, and repetition mattered more than the bean itself ever would again. Now here's where it gets more interesting. A regular coffee shop survives on walk-ins. Someone smells the coffee, feels like a treat, and comes in. Starbucks used to work that way too, decades ago. But somewhere along the way, the company figured out something most retailers never fully crack. Repetition is more profitable than persuasion. Getting a new customer to try your coffee once is expensive. Advertising, discounts, promotions. But getting an existing customer to buy the same coffee every single morning, almost without thinking about it, costs almost nothing. So Starbucks stopped trying to just win new customers and started engineering routine. This is where psychology quietly takes over the economics. Humans are creatures of habit loops. A cue, a routine, a reward. For millions of people, the cue is waking up. The routine is stopping at Starbucks. The reward is that first sip, and the 5 minutes of feeling like the day has officially started. Starbucks didn't invent this loop, but it built an entire company around reinforcing it, consistently, at scale, in nearly every major city on Earth. That consistency is the second hidden product. When you order a caramel macchiato in Tokyo, London, or Toronto, it tastes almost identical. That sameness feels boring on the surface, but economically, it's the whole point. Predictability removes decision fatigue. You're not evaluating whether today's coffee will be good. You already know. And when a brand removes uncertainty from a daily decision, people stop thinking of it as a choice and start thinking of it as a default. Once something becomes a default, price sensitivity quietly disappears. Most people can't tell you exactly how much their regular order costs. They just know it's their order. That's not an accident either. That's loss aversion and habit combined into pricing power most companies would kill for. This is also why Starbucks can raise prices gradually, year after year, without triggering the kind of backlash a grocery store might face for the same increase on milk or bread. When a purchase becomes part of identity, rather than a calculated decision, the price tag stops being the deciding factor. You're not comparing Starbucks to the gas station coffee down the street. In your mind, they're not even competing products anymore. Even the seasonal menu plays into this same psychology, in a way that looks like marketing, but functions like behavioral engineering. Every autumn, the return of the pumpkin spice latte isn't really about pumpkin, or spice, or even flavor preference. It's about scarcity and timing. The drink is only available for a limited window, which triggers a subtle urgency most customers don't consciously register. Miss it this year, and you wait another 12 months. That single seasonal product has, at times, been credited with meaningfully lifting quarterly sales, not because it's uniquely delicious, but because it turns an ordinary habit into an event people feel they shouldn't miss. But even routine alone doesn't explain the scale of this business. The real transformation happened when Starbucks stopped being a place you visit and became an app you carry. Think about what the Starbucks app actually does. It's not just a menu and a map. It's a payment system, a loyalty program, and a behavioral tracking tool, all wrapped into something that feels like a convenience. Every time you preload money onto that app, you're doing something most people never stop to consider. You're giving Starbucks an interest-free loan. At any given moment, Starbucks is holding well over $1 billion in prepaid balances sitting on those cards and app accounts. Money customers have already handed over. For coffee, they haven't drunk yet. That's not pocket change. That amount of stored, unspent customer cash rivals what some mid-sized banks hold in deposits. Starbucks essentially runs a quiet financial institution disguised as a rewards program, and almost nobody thinks of it that way. Some of that money is never spent at all. Gift cards get lost. App balances sit forgotten. Industry analysts call this breakage, unused balances that eventually get recognized as pure profit, since the company never has to deliver a product for them. It's a strange, almost invisible revenue stream, built entirely on people forgetting they'd already paid. And it doesn't stop at cash. That same app quietly builds one of the most detailed behavioral maps a retail brand can own. What time you usually order, what you tend to add when you're stressed versus relaxed, which promotions actually make you spend more, and which ones you scroll past. Coffee is the product on the surface. Data and habit are the assets underneath. This is where the central truth of the business becomes impossible to ignore. Starbucks isn't primarily in the business of selling coffee. It's in the business of owning a small, repeated slice of your daily routine, monetized through real estate, reinforced through psychology, and locked in through a digital ecosystem that behaves less like a coffee card and more like a subscription platform without the monthly fee. Now, none of this works without solving a much harder operational problem, one most customers never think about at all. Speed. A Starbucks store isn't really designed like a coffee shop. It's designed like a small factory with a friendly face. Watch the flow behind the counter sometime. There's a reason the espresso machines sit where they do. Why the pastry case is positioned before the pickup counter. Why mobile orders get funneled through a separate line. Every square foot back there has been optimized the same way an assembly line gets optimized. Because during the morning rush, a slow store isn't just inconvenient, it's a direct hit to revenue. If the line looks too long from the sidewalk, some customers won't even walk in. That single visual moment, someone glancing through the window and deciding whether to wait, is worth more to same-store sales than almost any advertising campaign Starbucks could run. This obsession with speed explains design choices that seem small, but aren't. The rise of drive-through-only locations in suburban areas, the stripped-down pickup-only stores near office towers with barely any seating at all. These aren't smaller versions of the classic Starbucks experience. They're a completely different calculation, one that trades atmosphere for throughput, because in certain locations, the habit loop doesn't need a comfortable chair. It just needs to be fast enough that stopping there feels effortless. This is also where hidden costs start showing up, the ones invisible to anyone just buying a latte. Rent in high-traffic locations isn't cheap, and Starbucks pays a premium for the exact visibility that makes its habit loop model work. Labor costs are constant because unlike a vending machine or a self-checkout kiosk, this business still depends on humans making consistent drinks quickly, under pressure, thousands of times a day. Training that labor force to hit that speed and consistency across tens of thousands of stores is its own enormous ongoing expense, one most customers never think about because it happens entirely behind the counter. Add to that, the cost of benefits and wage increases across a workforce that size, and labor quietly becomes one of the single largest expenses on the entire balance sheet, often rivaling the cost of the coffee itself. Waste is another quiet expense most people never consider. Unsold pastries, overpoured milk, ice that melts before it's used. None of it is dramatic on its own, but multiplied across tens of thousands of stores worldwide, these small inefficiencies become enormous line items on a balance sheet. There's also the matter of supply chain risk, sitting far upstream of any single store. Coffee is an agricultural commodity, grown in a narrow band of countries, vulnerable to weather, disease, and price swings on global markets. A single bad harvest season in Brazil or Vietnam can shift the cost of raw beans meaningfully. Starbucks manages this through long-term contracts and its own sourcing programs, but it's a reminder that underneath the branding and the loyalty app, there's still a physical crop grown by farmers thousands of miles away that the entire experience ultimately depends on. And then there's the real estate risk sitting underneath everything. Remember, Starbucks built its empire on prime, high-visibility locations. That's brilliant when foot traffic is high, but it becomes a liability the moment behavior shifts. When remote work reduced downtown commuter traffic in several major cities, some of those once perfect expensive corner locations suddenly became some of the most overpriced real estate on Starbucks' books. The same asset that built the empire can just as easily become the thing quietly draining it. You can actually see this play out in how the company has adjusted store formats over the past several years. Fewer large sit-down cafes in certain downtown cores, more compact grab-and-go formats near residential neighborhoods and highway exits, chasing the routine to wherever it moved, rather than waiting for it to come back. That's not a random reshuffling. That's a habit-based business physically following its customers' new patterns of movement. This tension is really the whole business in miniature. A model built entirely on repetition and routine is incredibly powerful when the routine holds steady. But it is also fragile in exactly one specific way. It depends on people continuing to walk the same path at the same time, past the same corner, almost without thinking. Disrupt that path, even slightly, and the entire habit loop the business was built on has to be rebuilt somewhere else at real cost. It's worth comparing this briefly to a business most people assume works the same way: a small independent coffee shop. An independent shop often survives on genuine product quality and personal relationships with regulars, the owner knowing your name, your order, your dog. That's a real and valuable business model, but it's a fundamentally different one. It doesn't scale the same way because it depends on individual human connection and rather than systemized routine. Starbucks essentially industrialized the feeling of familiarity without needing an owner who actually remembers your name. The loyalty app remembers it instead. There's also a version of this business that most customers never see at all: the licensed store. Not every Starbucks you walk into is actually operated by Starbucks itself. Many locations inside airports, grocery stores, and university campuses are run by a licensee, a separate company paying Starbucks for the right to use its name, its training, and its supply chain while handling the day-to-day staffing and operations themselves. From the outside, the experience looks identical, but financially, it's an entirely different arrangement, closer to a franchise than a company-owned store. This lets Starbucks expand its footprint into places it would never build alone, spreading that habit loop even further, while shifting a meaningful portion of the operational risk onto someone else's balance sheet. So the next time you walk into a Starbucks, notice what's actually happening around you. The location wasn't chosen by accident. The layout wasn't designed for comfort. It was designed for flow. The app in your pocket isn't just convenient. It's holding your money and quietly interest-free. And the reason you didn't even think about where to get coffee this morning isn't because Starbucks makes the best cup in town. It's because somewhere along the way, they stopped selling you coffee at all and started selling you the absence of a decision. That's the real business, not caffeine. Certainty.